Could you take governments to a competition commission?
No. You could, but what was it going to change?
Probably not going to win.
Let me tell you something about governments and why China works and why the rest of the world doesn't. You have a fight with this guy. You win your court case. You say, this guy is fucking up the whole industry, he's ruining everything. Cool. So that guy says, cool, you have to fix it. All right. You start, and now you've got 1 year to fix it. 6 months later, he's out of that office. Someone else has been re-elected. Now this person has to go and fulfill this thing or this mandate, and they drop the whole system. Like, do you think that it's enough time for a president to change a country in 4 years? No. So what does China not have? A president. They instead have the CCP, and that's it. And they have a 50-year plan, and they tell you exactly what's going on, and they're always progressing to forward, and nobody changes places. Now, the power is a problem because they have ultimate power, but the results speak for themselves.
Progression.
Like, how do you take 1 billion people out of poverty in 40 or 50 years? You don't do it every 4 years by changing people and having fucking fighting arguments all the time. You just back down, you get a team and a plan, and you run forward for the next 50 years, and you fix it. Every other democracy is always about who's popular, who's got the power, who's got the vote, how do we separate powers, how do we fight with each other. It doesn't work every time. Some countries move forward because they're progressive in that sense, and they don't let these inhibitions hold people back. And some countries and government organizations, they don't want to let go of the power. Yeah. They're just to the detriment of the people. They won't let go.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you find many people argue that that's part of the reason why dictatorships can work. Only problem with a dictatorship is, well, it's obviously dependent on who the dictator is. So, for example, we look at like a country like Rwanda as well. They have a dictator, but he is unbelievable.
Yeah.
He's brought in billions and billions of investment into their company.
Yeah.
I believe, I'm not sure if it's still now, but last time I checked, I know they have the most, you could say, gender diverse government out of like any country, pretty much.
Dude, they have robots in their hospitals.
Yeah, and I mean, this is
clean,
proper dictator.
Good,
my way or the highway type of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, then we have the other worst case scenarios where, we have other situations where there were dictators. And then obviously that kind of goes south. So
but it's always about the results, right? Yeah. So when you think about dictators, right, a dictator can have a mandate to say, I'm going to improve the country for the people, and he'll go, in Rwanda's case. People support him because he doesn't take shit. Yeah. He just gets the job done, and you can subscribe to that because you can see change happening around you. Yeah. Then you go and you see Gaddafi in Libya, and you see him living in a gold palace, fucking living the highest life, and everyone else on the street is poor.
Yeah.
That's when the revolutions happen. People don't mind dictatorships, right? People will subscribe to it because they want stability. They want stable growth. But instead, what we do is we fight with each other and we let politicians lie to us and say, I'll do it better, I'll do it better, I'll do it better. And then they get the job and they don't fucking do anything. They sell you a t-shirt and a meal and like, cool, vote for me, and you get it, right? And the mentality of this idea of democracy is to give everyone a fair opportunity. But it's not. It's not, because when you have a popularity competition, you hold weight and power. And you constantly sway that in whatever decision you want, and you start to divide people further than what they should be. You need unification. You need a unified group of people as a country to say, we want to go forward. But instead, people sit there and they're like, cool, tell us what you're going to do for us. And then you got to sit there and make up crap that you probably can't do, but you just want to win. So you'll say it anyway. And you're like, okay, cool, yeah. And then 3 years later, I swear at you because you lied to me. I don't lie to you. I had to lie to you for you to vote for me, because every other politician was lying to you as well.
Do you think that, now, part of what makes it, so we look at many of the countries, let's say, for example, a country like South Africa, do you think part of the reason that politicians, like, obviously if they want to get power and all that, but because we are so diverse, not just in terms of race and gender, but even social classes and economic classes as well. Do you think that's part of the reason why politicians rely on? Because it's like, I need to get as many votes from as many
people,
different people. So what Steve May wants is not what Tulani wants, it's not what Luther wants, it's not what I want.
Yeah.
So I think, okay, who can I get the most votes from?
Yeah.
Target you.
Let me ask you, do you think that people who vote should pay their taxes? That they should be put in hand in hand?
Ooh, I think that's a very dangerous...
It's a very loaded question, right? I don't have an opinion on this, right? But I can look at the facts and I can try to make a decision based on it. But I don't believe either or, right? you see, the thing is like you spend the taxes, right? You generate income. They take the taxes and they do stuff with it, right? Now your agenda might be say, okay, there's a lot of people who are impoverished and don't have. Take my money and go give them a hospital and a school and roads and start to alleviate them out of poverty. But if I don't have a say and everyone else says that that's what must be done with the money, then I feel alienated. I feel like I'm not being represented correctly, right? Like I'm paying my taxes. I'm being a positive member of society.
Sure.
And I'm trying to add more to the bottom line, right? I'm trying to build the economy up. Now, there's lots of people who don't have the opportunity to pay their taxes, and they'd love to if they even had income, but they were never given that. Now, what we do is we look at, the voters, for example, in South Africa. There's like 35 million eligible voters in the country, right? A third of them vote. So now you've got 20% of the population deciding what's the benefit for the whole nation. It's the same thing. It's effectively looking at the percentage of people that have power. So we've got this broken system in the sense that like there's a very small percentage of people who pay their taxes and have no say. Then there's a larger percentage of people who don't actually represent the majority, but they are the ones who vote and subsequently nominate our leaders. It's a very broken system because everyone feels disconnected, right? Everyone feels like they're not actually getting what they want to. Of the 20% of people who vote, how many of them do you think are unemployed and are just trying to look for a better life?
I think that's the ANC strategy. I think I read somewhere where the majority of their votes literally come from the people that need social grants, all these other social programs the most.
And that's why I can't cut them. They'll never cut them. They'll never kill the parastatals. They'll keep burning money because they know the minute that they stop, they lost their votes.
But then again, it's also because in South Africa we have COSATU is the thing. Like trade unions.
Well, the tripartite alliance was ANC, COSATU, and the Communist Party. That's how they formed the coalition to win the 1994 election. So COSATU and ANC are like this to each other because the trade unions it's where the money sits, right? Trade unions are there. There's no members who don't make an income. All the members make an income. So you need those votes. You have to get those votes. You need trade union votes. But trade unions don't actually help build an economy.
Yeah.
They actually destroy an economy in a lot of ways.
What makes you say that?
Expensive labor.
Because, expensive labor is one thing. And the second problem is that when you look at a labor, right, it's a deterrent for a lot of companies. Lots of countries in the world don't have labor. So when you have strong labor laws and you have a high barrier to entry, you look at it as a deterrent for you investing in the country. You must remember that how a union is structured is also a very broken system. So you take a percentage of all the people that are part of your union, and that's what you have as union fees, right? So I'm going to protect you. I'm your head of your union. I'm going to protect you. You're just going to give me 5% of your income every month, right? It's my agenda to make sure that you keep getting paid. The company could be in huge financial issues because of a pandemic or a global shortage or because of a politician making a bad deal with China, right? Now, I'm going to keep fighting just to keep your job, right? To the point where I could kill the business. And that happens constantly because I'm going to retrench you, but that retrenchment comes at a high cost.
Yeah.
Like you have to pay 3 months' salary or more, right? So when a company makes a decision to cut their workforce, it's not to say that like they have to cut the workforce because they're a malicious bunch of assholes. They maybe just need to do it to save their bottom line. You don't know. But a trade union will not necessarily represent you well enough. A trade union will be like, no, keep the jobs, keep the jobs, keep the jobs. Break the business. It's fine. And that's what you've seen that's happened in the last 10, 15 years in parastatals, right? We keep throwing good money off to bad, to keep a parastatal alive, to make a trade union happy. But we all know we need to privatize energy, we need to privatize aircraft, we need to privatize the military.
Don't get me started on that.
Right, but we all know it's clear in daylight. Like we are burning billions and billions of rands saving something that brings no value.
Yeah.
Like 10 billion rand bailout, or is this like 20 billion rand bailout per se? Why do we need an airline? Why? And if you are so confident that an airline can work in South Africa, let a private company do it.
Yeah.
Let them take the risk because you are burning money that should be going into a hospital, into a school, into something else to keep your own ego satisfied that you have an airline. No. Eskom, 440 billion rand in debt. 15 years ago, Eskom was profitable. Eskom was in a positive state, right? Now what we get to a point where like the ESCOM can't provide energy. But instead of you making the right decision for the country, you make a decision for the smallest amount of people that work at ESCOM and a trade union. You're not making decisions based on the good of the country. You're making decisions based on your political standing. Because if you piss off that person, you're not going to get revoted in. You're making the decision for yourself, not for the country. And all these decisions we made for SOEs are purely just to protect government's interest and the people who work in government. Nobody else. Are you going to benefit from Denel making a profit this year? No. Are you going to make a benefit out of SAA not burning money this year? No. You know what we need? We need power. Energy is the biggest demand that's holding us back. Everyone tells you that.
Yeah.
Every analyst around the world says South Africa will never get anywhere because you only have 20 megawatts of capacity right now. You're supposed to have 40, but you fucked everything up so badly you've only got 20. And over the next 10 years you need to get to 60. How the fuck are you going to do that? No, instead what we'll do is we'll try to keep protecting jobs. We always patch. There's no leadership, there's no guidance. Because proper, concise leadership, like what you see in China, would be like that, cut. We start fresh,
Look,
new, go.
I think what will probably happen a bit more often is when companies like Amazon, then they start manufacturing their own, or producing their own electricity. And I think a lot more companies are going to look into that direction.
But
but it's going to
you can't do it. You can't do it because what you've done is you've taken 440 billion rand worth of debt from different people on the collateral that you have the monopoly.
Sure.
You are the only person who's allowed to generate. So now when people can generate in their houses, you've lost your revenue. You've lost your income. That's why even ESCOM is trying to tax people for having solar.
Yeah, that is stupid.
It's wild, right? You can't produce enough energy, but instead we are so dependent on the revenue that we're milking from the people, even though we can't provide any service, because we are the monopoly. Where are you going to go? You're going to go nowhere else. You're going to go buy solar panels? Cool. I'm going to tax you because it's government and we're allowed to do so.
So how do we fix this thing, especially with the energy requirements of it?
You need to privatize all of these industries. No country needs an SOE. None of them do. What you need is good policy and good legislation. If you have good policy and good legislation, you can hold companies accountable to manipulating the prices or the supply chain or to like destroying the workforce. You can do so. What you don't need to do is own the entity. Because when you own the entity, you are going to make decisions based on your agenda, not on the entity's agenda. You know when you have a board of directors and a CEO and a chairman, their decision is to make the company prosperous. Sure. But when most of the board members are from government, what is their agenda? To stay in power.
Yeah.
You need to privatize all these things. It's the only way that you'll actually be able to grow and accelerate, because bureaucracy and governments are notoriously bad. You would think that the Netherlands is a very well-run country. It's an amazing place, right? It's got Amsterdam, it's got Utrecht. It's one of the biggest economies in Europe. Those guys have gone through governments, a whole new, everyone's fired and redone 6 months, every 6 months for years.
What?
They have such a destabilized environment. But the way that their economy is structured is that doesn't affect anything. Right? Shell still operates. The companies still operate. The whole economy is still operating regardless of these idiots who keep getting fired and rehired.
So Steve, you made an interesting point now,
right,
in terms of how the Netherlands government works.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this continuous debate over, should government have more or less power, and
less.
which results in
less.
a more efficient country.
Less.
Okay.
Less. I tell you, in America you have the separations of power, right? You have the House of Representatives, you have the Senate, and you have the president, right?
Sure.
All three of them have to agree for something to happen.
Yeah.
And the reason is so that one person doesn't have ultimate power. What does the ANC have? Ultimate power. And ultimate power corrupts. Plain and simple. You could put white people there. You could put black people there. You could put Indian people there. You could put any people you want in that position. They have ultimate power, and ultimate power corrupts. There's no two ways about it. Everyone says things about South Africa, they're oh, it's a terrible place, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you something, my man. If you were to look and to recreate the history of the last 50 years in South Africa and just do it in another place, in Brazil, the exact same shit would happen. You know why? Because we're all people. When you get ultimate power, it corrupts you. When you have this ability to make whatever decisions you want, it corrupts you. When you have the ability to say, cool, we're just going to pull money out of treasury and put it to our own agenda, it corrupts you. When you have that ability to do so, you're always going to be subjected to the corruption levels that you can create.
So then why would you say there is this fight against, you could say, capitalism.
Mhm.
Because we look at a more capitalistic economy, right?
Right.
It's obviously private ownership of property. We have the laws of supply and demand dictating how the market works.
Mhm.
And in that case, or provided people have competence and access to resources, the power is essentially hands of the people to produce products to progress society.
Yes.
Why would you say that there is so much of a fight against it? People say, no, what we need is for a government, or not even a government, but a central body to hold more control to redistribute wealth or redistribute the
It's
means
propaganda.
of production.
It's propaganda. There's no reason to do so. Like you want the people to be powerful, give power to the people. Plain and simple. You want an economy to be self-sufficient, give them the resources and the tools to do so. You can't have parastatals and monopolies and all of these like committees and bodies that you have to orchestrate. The world is moving at a fast rate, faster than it ever has before. And as soon as you put more layers of control and bureaucracy, you're not helping anyone progress any further.
Look, I think SOEs very questionable whether they, make sense for them to exist or not, right? But I do think we can't ignore the fact that like the gap between the haves and have-nots in South Africa in particular is still there.
Yeah, but it's there because we move too fucking slowly. Because all of our businesses are tied up with governments and people who are not educated to run those positions. Just like we said now, like think about this. The guy who runs science and technology department is not a scientist. How do you expect an industry around science and technology to propel forward if the people who are running it don't actually understand the space?
Yeah, so I agree with that point, right? And to the point where I don't think SOEs should maybe exist, right? But I still think the government still plays a vital role in South Africa, especially to the point that there
100% agree.
About like redistribution, upskilling, and all of that.
But that comes from litigation. I mean, from legislation and from policy.
Sure.
Not from ownership. Because when ownership is in play, your policies will never depict a fair market. So the policy for energy production, right, energy generation, will always stay with Eskom because it's a parastatal that's owned by the government. The government will always say that it's for the people that we have to protect this entity so that the price of energy and what doesn't change. That's nonsense. As soon as you build a hyper-competitive market, the customer will benefit because the price will always be in a war.
Sure. So the reason why I would imagine Holland and their government works is because they don't have ownership. They just have policies and companies still sort of like...
Well, yes and no. So they do have some spaces. Like there's still a monarch in the Netherlands. So the Royal Shell company is a Dutch company, right?
Okay.
But the shareholders are the people, right? And the monarch and different kinds of people because it's a publicly traded entity as well.
Okay.
Eskom isn't on the JSE, right? Because if it was, it would have been delisted. Like because it does so badly.
Yeah. The numbers don't make sense.
But that in its form is making it public. When it's available on a public market and anyone can buy shares of Eskom, then it's technically an SOE, right? It's owned by the people. Anyone can own it. You can own a share, Everyone could be given a share of Eskom if it was listed. But you can't list it because it's a terribly run business and you don't ever want anyone to see the books, right? Because you are in power. I control the money. I know what money goes where. I can do what I want. I can change the laws and whatever I feel like. And I'm protected by myself because I'm in the monopoly. So do the people actually benefit at the end of the day?
Look, I think we, as voters in general, right, are becoming more aware of these, and you have parties that sort of like constantly challenge the ANC and the ruling party, right? We are conscious, I think, hopefully, we make better decisions come election time. I just don't know if that's a guarantee, given that the strategy, obviously, for the ANC, I would imagine, they speak to the people that really need these social grants and...
but also at the time, like, and that's why I ask you, should you have to pay your taxes to vote, right? Because if you have an income and you have a job, regardless of what kind of job you have, it's fair to assume that you are an educated person. You understand what's going on, you understand what UIF is, you understand what PAYE is, you understand what these things are, and you become a little bit more, you have a higher level of transparency as to how the world operates around you.
Sure.
When people who don't know those things are making decisions for you, do you believe that that's fair?
Look, like in that specific case, if you're looking at the demographics of South Africa, I think it would be... Remember you mentioned something about power?
Yeah.
So if only the rich pay tax, they would vote for people that have legislation that's catered towards
like
them.
Republicans.
Yeah, it would be the opposite impact. So you're not solving much by giving the power to now the people with taxes. All it would do, right? It would put the state in a way where, which is what apartheid was, where 80% of the population
got nothing out of it.
Right? And then the 20%, which are the haves, end up, like, for example, let's assume now only tax people, only people that pay tax have power, right? I, as Tulani, want to be in power. The likelihood is I'm going to tell people I'm going to slash it. I'm going to slash currently at 45% tax. So likelihood is that I'm going to tell people I'm cutting your tax by 50% to 22%. Now you have a budget deficit problem, right? Where you have 80% of the people who need to be fed. Now you have more money on your hands. Now you start having offshore investments, X, Y, and Z. And then there's no money that might be generated within that specific economy, right? So I don't think...
If you give power to taxpayers, eventually the people who are stuck in poverty will never get out of it.
Right. So I don't think that's necessarily like a solution to the specific case. I agree with the privatization of everything, but I think...
Do you know why the tax system would work? If voting for taxes would work? If there were no parastatals. Because then you could say, or if there were parastatals and entities and investments that the country's making, you would expect the shareholders who keep investing to have some control, right? So when I say that you should pay, if you pay taxes, you should vote, it's because technically you're taking the taxes and you're investing in it, right? You're investing in the parastatals and all these private entities that you think are generating more money for the poverty line, but it's not, because the structure will never allow that to happen. If you were to remove the parastatals from the equation, right, and then give the vote to anyone, then it would be fair.
Yeah,
100%.
That I can agree with. It's just that for me, it's just like when you take power from to another party, as you've mentioned before, is that power corrupts. So the human part of it, it's not that the people with money would suddenly now have better ethical decision-making skills, where they suddenly go, oh, okay, guys, I'm going to vote for the person who's going to have the greater good for everyone else. So the voting will always be geared towards how
it affects me.
How it affects me personally. Because as human beings, that's naturally how we think.
I don't think anyone in the country has a problem with funds being built for hospitals and for schools and for infrastructure. No one's got a problem with that. And if anyone does, they're just an asshole, and we shouldn't listen to them. Everybody wants their fellow man to be better. Everyone wants their fellow people to be better. But the problem is that we are sitting between too many different types of structures, and none of them work, because you're adopting and pulling the things that are beneficial to you as the politician, but not to the people, right? So for example, like a free market, right? Yes, there's a free market here in the country, but there isn't really. If you want to make power, there's no free market. You want to be a telecom, there's no free market. You want to do infrastructure projects, there's no free market, right? These things don't exist, because now we have the structure where like, okay, cool, all the money goes to this organization, and then this organization disperses it wherever they want, right? And they have their own interests. And this organization is a government, and we assume our government to be in doing things in our best interest. We assume so. But the problem is when they have too much in front of them, right? And they're not making nothing's transparent as to what their agenda is or what they're trying to achieve. You are not helping any situation, right? So now we've got this problem where a small percentage of the population pays their taxes and feels very underappreciated because they don't get anything back. Now you've got a huge population of people that have been told for the last 2 decades that they're going to get out of poverty, but they never do, right? Now the situation is here is that these people leave in droves because they feel that they're not being represented correctly, and these people can go nowhere, and they just beg for handouts all the time because that's all that they can do to survive.
Look, I have an argument against the free market situation.
Why?
Right? So the idea of free market, which is capitalistic in its nature, is that the market determines what is demanded, right, and what should be supplied. That's the idea of it. But I could argue that if you look at America, the black man still hasn't prospered, even in its most free market, right? So if you look at, like, I was reading an article yesterday that, like, in terms of the companies that are listed, only 2% are self-made in the American market, right? Which means that in in an American market, even though the market is free but the power is still lies with people who are able to build from a very young age because of money.
Yeah.
So
for privilege.
yeah, right. So then if you look at, for example, the tech companies that are currently existing in America,
Yeah.
even though in its free power, right, there's so many tech companies that come and go outside of America,
Yeah.
but we only know of 5 or 6. So there's only 5 companies that we can think, which is YouTube slash Google.
Well, it's the public
Tesla.
ones, right?
Yeah, right. So I think that a environment where, for example, in America, to try to regulate that, as you mentioned, legislation, they've got an antitrust law, which means that Amazon and Google can't get too big to a point where they have a monopoly, right?
Which is what ESCOM has.
Do you get what I mean? So hence the samey thing, as you mentioned now, that like there's no system that's perfect.
No one should have a monopoly. Anyone who has a monopoly is power, right? It's power that corrupts. So, and the thing is, like, you can argue about how monopolies are, right? So Google is the monopoly on search, right? And subsequently, they are the monopoly on online ads with search. But in actual fact, they only represent like 6% of the global search and advertising market. So are they a monopoly? Yes, they are. But how you perceive them to be, it can change, right? Because if you look at how you study them in their market, cool. This company can be deemed as a monopoly or not as a monopoly. It depends how you look at it in what context. If you look and say, all right, how much search traffic is going on in America? 70% goes to Google. Okay, how much of the online spend is going to Google? Less than 10%. Are they a monopoly? Now, the question that I want you to think about for a second is that commodities and basic needs are different, completely different from what Amazon provides, right? Amazon having a monopoly is an arguable thing, and you can structure with policy to fix that up. Policy should be there to prevent monopolies from existing, plain and simple, right? But the problem here is that we have allowed a monopoly to exist in multiple forms in South Africa, and we have not relied on regulation and legislation to do so. Instead, we have inherited a very, very prosperous, set of entities, SOEs, and subsequently, all the power corrupted the individuals, and no value was presented to the population, right? What profit has ESCOM brought to the population in the last 10 years? Nothing. But they produce a commodity. You need energy and electricity to keep going. So that is the problem that sits there, is that you look at the commodity, and the commodity should never have a monopoly. Commodities should be in a free market. But you should have high levels of legislation and regulation to protect the everyday man, to make sure that they're still being offered what they need to.
Okay, the inverse of that specific thing. Let's assume ESCOM. Let's now assume that it's privatized and there's 10 people, or there's 10 companies.
10 ESCOM-like companies.
Yeah, there's 10 ESCOM-like companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in an idealistic world, all of them coexist. But in reality, they compete with each other.
Of course.
Because if they don't compete with each other, then we say there's collusion involved, and then we also have a problem with that, right?
100%.
So there's 10 of them, and let's assume naturally how the world has gone is that there's 4 or 5 people that exist within a specific market, right? And now, again, to keep it country specific, we live in a country where 80% of the people live below the breadline.
Mm-hmm.
And electricity, in its importance, needs to be affordable. Even though ESCOM at this point in time are not...
They are, actually. We have some of the lowest cost for energy in the world.
Really? So, it's also another perception thing that we have in ESCOM being...
We have a low cost of energy because we have tons of reserves of dinosaur juice.
Which is coal.
Well, it's coal, it's gas, it's whatever, it's dinosaur juice, right?
Okay.
So we have a high percentage of that in the country, and that's why energy is low. Our problem is not the cost of energy, it's the capacity of energy.
Yes. So actually, you make my point even clear. So remember the market, demand, supply, right?
Yeah.
So if everyone in the country is in demand of the specific commodity, would the price not shoot up to a point where it's not affordable for the layman or the everyday person to be able to afford it?
Yes and no, but that's where legislation and regulation comes in, right? You have a regulating body that gives ESCOM the authority to raise their prices, right? But let's be serious. How can the government hold the government responsible?
I fully agree with that.
Yeah, so if you had 10 energy producers and you said that the price per kilowatt is 2 Rand a kilowatt, Everyone has to make it a 2 rand a kilowatt. Do you know what changes? How you make it a 2 rand a kilowatt. So maybe you don't use coal, maybe you use solar, maybe you use natural gas, maybe you use wind farm. You know the price is fixed, and the price is affordable to all of us. All of us can do so. Now, there might be extra margins on top, for the distribution of it and the connection to your house and so on. You may pay different prices in different regions because of lots of different costs, right? Like running a cable for 1 kilometer and running a cable for 100 kilometers has a different cost attached to it. But if you can use regulation and you can use a structure to say, okay, there is a fixed cost at this base price, which is what it is actually, it is how it is right now. But the problem is, we don't have an issue with the cost of energy. We have a problem with the capacity of
to
energy.
produce it.
Yes, and to keep up with demand. Because right now, if you wanted to open a brand new factory, Eskom can't give you power to do so. So you want to give new jobs, you want to create a brand new workforce, but you fucking can't because they can't give you the power to do so. So what do? You go to Thailand instead because they can. You lose out because the opportunity cost is every single day. And over the next 10 years, if we have to double our capacity just to keep up with the demand of the growth and the 6% we're trying to get back to every year in GDP growth, you need to have a free market because you've clearly seen for the last 15 years that this structure does not fucking work and it's broken. It's completely broken. You need to break it down. You have to split it up. You have to give other companies and other opportunities for other people to invest and build the capacity we need. Because if we could do so, we could give people jobs. We wouldn't need them to be dependent on social grants anymore. But you can't do it. Fuck, man. Americans, the Chinese, the Japanese, thousands of people could come and be like, sweet, factories. Hi, Chief. Sorry, we got no energy for you.
Actually, but I want to divert a bit. Another problem with that specific case would be minimum wage because it would just not be cost efficient.
Minimum wage is an easy thing to manipulate. Change exchange rate.
No, what I mean is, even if you change exchange rate, for example, China, right? Like a real life example.
So minimum wage in China is higher than it is here.
No, that's the point I was trying to make, and that's a result of demand. So in China, back in the day, Nike and them could take their people there.
Yeah.
Guess what? The Chinese people used that money and started getting educated.
Yeah.
Started getting educated, and the demand for those jobs, then more people started getting educated, and the price per person, right? So China at this point in time still has some form of production, but in reality, it's not as much. So that's why they have tech companies. So production now has moved to countries like Indonesia, Thailand, as you mentioned, as a result of that, right? Because, as again, they had a 50-year view on this idea of what they want. So through cheap labor, but the perception in the everyday man is that China still has cheap labor.
It's not just cheap labor, it's that policy is depicted that import duties on raw materials is zero. There is strong systems with special economic zones for taxation and for funding and opportunities. Everything's run well. Doesn't mean that just because people are cheap that the product is cheap. Like the product is cheap to make. That's only one component of it, right? The government has great policy to depict that, cool, we're getting raw materials from all over the world, we're producing it, we're not going to tax you every step of the way, we're only going to tax you when you export. We'll figure out ways to make sure that your bottom line stays as low as it possibly can, so that you are competitive on the global scale. Because this iPhone, or this phone in my hand, right, it wasn't cheap labor that made this phone affordable. It was the components inside that made it affordable. And the other supply chains that all exist around the factory that made this, that made it cheap for everyone.
So for me, the thing about China, right? Number one, I think we overestimate what they've been able to do without looking at the bottom line. So in this case, the state protects the Chinese companies a lot.
Oh.
So this specific brand is popular.
State doesn't protect companies. State protects its interests. Some companies have stakes from the government.
No, but what I mean by that, I don't mean that they have ownership. It's they protect the Chinese companies. Yes. I don't mean ownership. I mean they protect Chinese companies.
You know how they do that?
Legislation.
Legislation. You can't import other brands. You have to buy local.
And that's exactly that's exactly my point here. Is that so even though Apple phones like Huawei over the last 5 years have been able to improve as a result of the Chinese legislation and they first focus, if you go to China, Huawei is quite popular, and Chinese products in China are very popular.
Yes.
Right? They have their own market, but at the same time, they've got over 1 billion people. So they don't even need to expand outside of China.
It's 1 billion people who have jobs. Having 1 billion people who have no jobs means nothing, right? That's just, then you have to stick in and give them social grants. But when you have 1 billion people who have an income, now you got a market. What China did very well is that they protected themselves. And they did that, and our government has not fucking done that at all. Do you know that it's cheaper to import steel from China than it is to buy local steel?
Yeah, I fully agree. This
is bad policy, right? Exactly, it's bad policy. In China, you're only allowed to import 30 films from foreigners a year. 30. That's it. You're only allowed to have 30 foreign films that are on cinemas in China. Finished. You're not allowed to import any other brands as you want. There's super taxes on that stuff. So when you go and you want to buy a Gucci bag, right? You go to London, you buy a Gucci bag, it costs $1,000. You buy a Gucci bag in Beijing, it's $2,000. Plain and simple. And people pay and they don't care. The taxes circulate and it goes back to the people. When you are producing a local Chinese product in a local city and you're selling it to that space, there's no taxes. That's how they built their economies. That's how they built that space. They were strong, good policies. But the Chinese government only took investments in strategic companies, but never to the point where they are a parastatal.
Yeah.
You see?
No, I fully agree with it. But anyway, it's weird. What time? We're in like 1:30, and the whole idea of this actually
was to be short.
No.
To talk about
to talk about you.
Oh.